everyone, I'm Dr. Sam Kenyon, and right now in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to solder the connectors for the drone kits that we sent you. So you'll see in your package that you received these gold connector pieces, male and female. They plug into each other like so. And so this makes all of the drone components very modular, so you can work on them independently and then assemble the drone all together. So I'm going to show you right now is how to solder one of these connectors onto any piece of wire that you need. And then I'm also going to show you how to connect wires to this power breakout board. Basically, this lives on the bottom of the drone. We'll show you that in the assembly. But each of the 4 motors needs to get power from this board, and we also need to get power for the jets and nanos from this board as well. So this board will get a lot of cables hanging out from it. Okay, so to start, you have your wire. You may have some of the metal exposed from the rubber, you may not, but either way I would recommend using some wire strippers and removing part of the jacketing there, so you can kind of see that here. What I like to do, since this is a multi-strand wire, is I'll twist it in my hand so to prevent the strands from fraying. Okay. We can also prepare some heat shrink, so this is something that hopefully you have on hand, but we need to heat shrink all of these connectors so that they don't electrically connect and cause a short for the drone. So I'll be using one that's about this size, but as you can see I have a kit. You can kind of plug and play and see which size is best for you, but you can kind of see it fits right over that connector. Okay, so I will cut this to size. Always cut a little bit more than you think you'll need from the heat shrink, because you always want it to cover all that you plan to cover. Okay, so in terms of soldering gear, what you'll need to do this is the solder itself, which here I have some lead-free solder, which definitely recommend lead-free. Okay, I have my 3rd hand alligator clip set up here. It's okay if you don't have this, but it will make your job a lot easier. I also have a fan to remove the exhaust from the soldering iron, which I will turn on now. And then we have our soldering iron here. We also have this brass sponge. This helps to wick the solder from the tip and keep it nice and clean as I'm working. Okay, so I'll turn the iron on. You want the iron to be somewhere between 700 and 750 degrees Fahrenheit. Right now it's set at, I believe, 725 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's just warming up here. You can see the temperature increasing now on the soldering iron. So to prepare, typically you have to put the heat shrink on first if the other end is bounded, but since we have a free wire here, I'm not going to worry about putting the heat shrink on first. But that's something you want to put the heat shrink on first before you make the connection, so that this is present to slide over it. See? But if you solder afterwards, then sometimes it's hard to add the heat shrink. So I'll always apply it on the cable first. I'm going to put this in my 3rd hand bars. And then I might put this in the other end. Okay. So I'll just put this inside. Now, for the female connector, be sure to not put the cable inside of the large end, because the end that has the deeper hole has to get the female connector. We want the end that's shallower to get the cable, okay? So use that to get it set. And then I'll take my iron out and use my brass sponge to clean it. Okay, and a good tip is nice and shiny. That will make the solder stick to it. Oh, and another thing I need safety-wise is some glasses to protect your eyes. Okay? Okay. So one of the keys for soldering is to ensure that you're heating up not only the wire that you're soldering, but also the thing that it's going to, okay? So I'm going to position the soldering iron in such a way that not only the cable is getting heated up, but also the connector, okay? So let me just make sure this is pushed inside, okay? I'm going to add the iron and add the solder here. And you can see that there's a lot of smoke being generated, but the fan is taking it away. I'm not inhaling it. And I'm filling up enough solder where I see it come in to this top hole. See that right there? It's in a nice flow state. You can see that some of the solder went up through the twisted wire. I keep adding until it's kind of covered that area. And there you have it. Put my iron back. Let that solidify. And done. So what I have here is, you can see the solder is in the hole, the wire sticking out. And you can see this stuff here, that's the leftover flux. So this solder, in the core of it, has a material called flux, which allows the solder to flow really nicely. So if you, for whatever reason, make a mistake and need to remelt this solder, you'll want to add some flux to make it flow a lot better. But since the flux is already here in the core, the first time I use it, it works just fine. So again, anytime you need to rework, be sure to add some flux. And flux can come in a pen like this. There's other forms, but this is probably the most common. Okay? So I might remove a little bit of the flux there, just to clean it up. You can use tweezers for this, I'm just using my nails. And then we will add the heat shrink. Probably go from the other direction. Okay, be sure to push the heat shrink on this type of connector all the way to the end. We don't want any exposed gold copper area, because if it's exposed, like I said, it can touch other connectors and cause a short for your drone, so that would be bad. So this is how you'll set up the heat shrink, right up to the edge. And then you'll need some sort of hot air gun to melt the heat shrink. It only needs to get above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe, in order for it to melt. So, let's see. I think that's what it is. Is there a rating on here? Yeah, so it doesn't need to get too hot. This is about like the heat that like a hairdryer might put out. We'll turn that on. And you can see, as I apply the heat, the tubing shrinks over it and keeps that nice and protected. See how it's kind of curling over? All right. So that is a heat shrunk connector for you. So that's one direction. We'll do the other one now, the male connector, so they can plug in like this. So in a similar fashion, I'm going to use the wire strippers to get the tubing off of this. Right now I'm using an 18 gauge setting, that's plenty. Okay. You can always, if you feel as though you've trimmed too much off, you can cut the wire to make it a little shorter like that. That might make my life a little easier. Okay. I'm going to use my handy third hand system. to try to align it as best I can with going straight into the connector. There's a strand loose. Make sure that all the strands, because this is a multi-stranded cable, you want to make sure that all the strands are together so that you don't have anything sticking out and poking a hole in your heat shrink or anything like that, okay? Alright, so I'm all set. And again, this would be your time to check, do I need to put the heat shrink on? I'm gonna just use this extra piece here. Right now I don't because there's nothing on the other end, but if there was something at the other end, then I would need to put my heat shrink on before I did the soldering. Okay, just ready to go. Get my iron, clean it off. Again, I want it to be nice and shiny. Nice shiny tip, ready to go. I'm going to apply it inside of the socket so it's heating up the connector and the cable that's coming into it. I want both to be touched by the iron. I'll change my angle here. And just feed in the solder until it's pretty filled up. Okay. That looks like plenty. Clean my tip off, put it back. And there you have it. Another one connected. And then I will put my heat shrink on. And for the female connectors, you don't want to put it past the connector, but you want it to go just to where it's going to be exposed. It's still a little hot. Oops, it's shrinking over it. Because the connector's still hot, it started heat shrinking the heat shrink. So I'm just gonna cut that end off here. Give that a few moments to cool off. But you can see as these plug together that only this part is exposed, so I'm only gonna put the heat shrink up to that point, okay? That point. I'm just keeping them connected to show you, but you can keep them disconnected if you would prefer. So it'll look like that with it disconnected. Okay, so now I'll just keep that in the right spot. Apply my hot air. Give it a good rotation so it heat shrinks evenly. There you have it. You can see I've put the female connector on the black cable, which usually denotes ground, or on this board it'll be the minus sign, right? And the red cable I put on the male connector, and I'm going to also connect that to the plus sign, okay? Okay, so the next step is to solder these cables to this power breakout board, okay? So this you'll have to do on all 4 of these plus and minus pads, or 4 pairs, so there's 8 total. And these will go to the 4 motors. And we also need to do a similar thing with some of these cables for the ground and 5 volts to give power to the Jetson Nano, okay? So to prep for this, I think I'll make these a little shorter, about that long, make them similar lengths. And I'll strip some of the wire off. That's about good for this. Twist that together, that multi-strand, so no strands become loose. Wire strip the other side. Twist it together. Since I started with the black cable last time, I'll start with it again. I use my third hand to get everything set up. Alright, so that's holding that in place for me, all set up. And again, I'm going to want to apply my iron, my soldering iron, in such a way that I'm heating up both the cable and the pad. Okay? So sometimes it means holding at an angle or pushing down. Add a little bit. You want to heat this up long enough that the solder starts sticking to the pad as well as the cable. So it's sticking to the cable, but I really want it to start sticking to the brass colored pad underneath. Alright, you can see that. See how that's now flowing to the pad? I'm going to keep filling that in and allowing that flow to occur. Alright. So I held that on there for a good 10 to 15 seconds. The key to this is not to lift your iron back up to have the solder solidify, because if it does, then everything's going to harden and all the flux that's in this solder is gone. And then you have to add some more flux to reflow it evenly again. So best to do it all in one good shot. Make sure your setup is all exactly how you want it before you begin, because it's always easier the first time you do it, okay? Alright, now I'll show you how to do the other one, and we're going to do this on the table. In case you don't have a third hand set up, you can also just put this on the table and do it that way. Okay, so we'll put the red on the plus. Get that all set up. And again, you're going to want to push the iron to heat up the cable and the surface below. We want everything to flow nice and even. We don't want it to form like a big ball on the tippy top. We want it to make a nice square with the stuff in below. So I'm just slowly adding the solder onto the iron. And this might take a little bit to warm up if you're on a table, because there's some heat dissipation happening below. And you can see it's starting to flatten up on the edges. Starting to go to, all right, I'll lift my up, and there you go. I might have to back up just a bit. All right. So there you have it. And you can see there's some shiny stuff around it. That's just the residue flux. Some went through to underneath. You can scrape that off with a tweezer. You can use some isopropyl alcohol to get that off as well. But it doesn't hurt anything. It's not electrically conductive. So yeah, that's how you set up the power ESC board for the connectors. And you'll do something in a very similar fashion on this ground and 5-volt pin to give power to the Jets and Nanos. The last thing I wanted to point out is we have these connectors here for plugging in the battery to this power distribution board so we can get power to this. But the way that the drone bodies work is we can't just solder that directly in and have it create have it fit in the mechanical space provided, okay? So you could either, one of the options you could do is to actually just have an intermediate cable going between these holes to this connector. So I can show you a bit what that might look like. We gave you a little bit of cable, red and black, that you could use to do this. So I'm just going to cut, we'll just do one of the blacks to show you. Wire strip one end and twist. And wire strip another end and twist. You don't want to make these too long, or else you probably want to add some heat shrink to make sure that they don't connect, but we'll make them nice and short and then you don't have to. So the way that these connectors work, you have a plus sign here on this flat square side and a minus sign here on this half of like a hexagon side, okay? So we'll make sure that the minus sign goes with the minus sign here. What I might do is kind of curl this up. So we'll solder one end on here, and we'll solder the other end right there. Okay? Alright, so let's go for it. So again, I want to push the iron on both the cable and the surface that I'm trying to bind it to. That's important, that you want heating on both things, or else one will heat unevenly more than the other thing. So you can see the solder starting to fill that hole. What we really want is for it to make contact with the gold colored edges of the circle. So now it's in contact with that. This is not pretty, but it's getting the job done. Okay, spread it out a little bit. Again, the moment I lift my iron up, it's not going to be in a flow state, so we want to make sure. Okay. So that's one end. And then we'll put the other end onto this connector. Again, if you make it longer, I would recommend putting some heat shrink over this. You can also use some electrical tape in a pinch. I'm just kind of using my finger as well just to push it together. Keep that together. Alright, keeping it pushed while it spools. Alright, let's take a look. So now I have a cable going from the power to here to the power connector here. You'll want to do the same thing on the other side. If you can make the cable shorter, great, but about this length or shorter is probably what you'll want to do. Okay, so this concludes the soldering tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and please email us if you have any questions.